Hi, everybody. Good morning to all of you out here in Asia and on this half of the world, and good evening and good afternoon to all of you on the other side over there in North America. And for anybody who might be somewhere in between in Europe, good day. I'm Joe, the CEO and founder of LILA Movementechnology, and we're really excited to have you today. We've got a nice little lineup. A very high-profile lineup to talk today about topic of golf, and specifically focusing on everybody's favorite goal, hitting the big shot. This is part of our regular webinar series, and as always, we've got really great speakers here. We've got Dr. Scott Lynn out of the University of Cal Fullerton. Scott has engaged with us now for several months. In the lockdown period, we all connected, and Scott started running some very interesting research there in the USA with us. And connected with Scott is John Cronin, Dr. John Cronin, who heads the research for wearable resistance and LILA EXOGEN worldwide. John, of course, out of the Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand. So a little bit about the flow. I'm going to do a brief introduction to the technology and what we've been doing with it in golf and sports. John's going to jump in on some of the high-level science that they've been finding in general on wearable resistance. And then that's the first 20 minutes. And then we'll be bringing in Scott. And we're going to be in a roundabout discussion. Scott's going to share specifically what he's doing with EXOGEN, what they're looking at in the research. There's several studies going on there, single case study as well as group study, taking a look at the whole topic of resistance training in golf. And yeah, and then we're going to have a Q&A with everybody and get into the meat of the discussion. So without further ado, let's jump in. Okay, so again, good morning, thank you everybody, good evening. Hitting the big shot. As I mentioned, I'm the CEO of LILA Movementechnology and actually the founder and creator of the EXOGEN kit. For those who may wonder a little bit about EXOGEN and the product and the company, is I actually started working on this in 2003, training Olympic athletes for the Athens Olympics. So we've been doing this a very long time. Me, myself, I've been in the high performance game for over 30 years, working with pro teams and national programs back in North America and now across the world. And one thing I just want to say at the start is don't get overwhelmed. It's easy to start thinking about the word gimmick. And in the world of golf, you guys are exposed to a heck of a lot of gimmicks. What we're talking about today is weight training. And if you consider weight training a gimmick, I can't help you. But we know weight training works. What we're looking at now is possibly the most specific weight training on the planet. And we're looking at how that works. And like one very good specialist from the NFL told me, he said, you know, everybody's been trying to figure out how to glue weight on the body. He said, you figured it out. Now we got to figure out how to use it, because so much of our resistance has been external. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So like I said, there's no magnets, there's no unknown science here. It's just weight training. Okay, so I'll be touching on a couple things, not in detail. Factors in hitting for distance, we're just going to touch on that briefly. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between improving golf fitness and improving golf game. Limitations of what we call traditional resistance training. That's most of what you see currently available out there today. We're going to take a little touch on specificity of speed and strength. How specific is it actually in high skill movements? And then we're going to hit on the important word, transference. Okay, now you can argue all day, and I bet if we got 10 biomechanists, coaches, golfers, and whoever else in the room, there'll be a discussion on this slide, but I want to keep it simple. Distance factors come down to three primary areas, okay? Club head speed, centeredness of contact, angle of approach. And if we squeeze those down, really what that means is there's a physical aspect, a fitness aspect to that in the club head speed, and that comes down to a factor of strength. There is range of motion involved, but that's range of motion is physical, can be trained, but it's also a technical aspect. But let's talk about the word specific strength. It's not just strength as we know. If it was strength was the only issue, then a 400-pound golfer is going to hit further than a 200-pound golfer every time. It doesn't work like that. But so there is something trainable in fitness, and it's specific strength. Everything else is either technique or focus, and that's the primary factor in skill. So in any skill. And so what we're doing today is we're looking at organic ways to take strengthening and technique and focus and make them stronger together, work together. We can't separate them out anymore. So controversial first slide. There on the screen, you see a bunch of equipment that is designed to improve golf fitness, okay? Now, every one of them can be argued, do they actually improve your game? In certain situations, they may or may not, but these are all forms of external or traditional resistance training. You've got weighted clubs, you've got cables and tubings, you've got strap apparatus with body weight, etc. But if specific strength is important, ask yourself, what is missing in these pictures? We just said technique and focus are probably more important than specific strength. That's why you spend all your time at the club and with your coach, not at the gym. What's missing from those pictures? Quickly, just so you hear some terms today, traditional resistance training, TRT, that's where equipment is external to the body. It focuses on lifting, moving, or accelerating an external load, and its outcome is primarily general or some level of light specificity and strength, hypertrophy, power, or speed. Traditional resistance training has a purpose. I still do it every week, and I've trained thousands of athletes with it. But what we're learning is it has limitations. Some of the benefits, of course, you can load heavy, you can stimulate hormones, and anybody who needs to get testosterone up, whether you're an older adult or whether you're a high-level mass athlete like an NFL player or rugby player or a sprinter, you can build moderate to high levels of strength, power, mass, bodybuilding. It can contribute to general speed and power, in some cases specific. It's simple to use, it's readily available. But some of the limitations of traditional resistance training. Number one, movements are equipment defined, not user defined. That's not kind of important, that's critical. I've been a strength coach with the best programs in the world, and we spend not minutes, we spend hours and years teaching people resistance training skill exercise just so they can use a weight that doesn't match their movement. Focus is often maximal, not on optimal loading. It will alter movement patterns, technique, and kinematics. It's performed in a gym setting, not always, almost never in a sports setting. Progressions are large and too heavy to achieve specific speed, and we'll look at that in a minute. And your transference to specific movement and competition is often limited. There's a difference between being fit. I can make athletes fit. I can improve every physical parameter, but they go to competition and they don't win more. They don't change their score. And a lot of people say, oh, it's happening, but in truth, it's actually not. And this is why we developed EXOGEN. This is why we're exploring this area, because there is a huge gap between general training and a lot of the tools that we've currently used and repainted and what's happening in performance. And that's the topic of transference. How specific is it? So this is an example, not from golf. This is world-class martial artists. Okay, these are. I want to
see if it slides. It's okay if it slides for us.
What's that punch speed? Okay. Now, what was happening there? First off, speed sports, whether it's golf, combat, badminton, I mean, and not sprinting because that's full body mass speed. I'm talking about that quick arm speed. These guys are moving their hands at the fastest speeds possible. And you can see that half the time, you can't really see that punch. Even in the scoring, you can't see it. But what I want you to think about is what's going on here in this trial. Now, these guys are loaded with weight. Those blue things you see are early. This is 10 years ago, 12 years ago, before the World Championships. Early loads, and we had 4-ounce, 8-ounce loads, or 100, 200 gram loads placed across the arm. And we were exploring at what range does light load affect technique. We'd put 100 grams on the arm, we'd put 200 grams on the arm, we'd put 300 grams, we'd put 400 grams, 4-ounce, 8-ounce, 12-ounce, very light loads dispersed around the arm. And very quickly, we started to see technique change in some of the highest level athletes in the world. And if you look at that red line there, that red line is the target distance and range of motion that athlete has spent his entire life training for. And if you know, like golf, if you're not following through completely, your stroke has a problem. If you're stopping early, same thing with the punch. If you're not getting distance, you're not scoring. You're not scoring, you're not winning. As we got to 300 to 400 grams or 12 to 16 ounces on that arm, we started noticing that the athlete's technique had changed. His range of motion had changed considerably. That's the difference between a world champion But that little bit of difference between the red line and the white line, that's the difference between a world champion and maybe a club competitor. Those 2 or 3 extra inches is a score or no score. And it's a massive difference in change. So when we're moving at high speed, a very light load has a tremendous impact. And remember, these are world-class athletes. This guy's 170 pounds, very strong. He can probably bench press 100, 120 kilos. In the other incident, it was about accuracy. And the reason his body had rewired that pattern is for safety. He wasn't throwing and extending that shoulder all the way and that elbow all the way because that extreme range of motion, that's where injuries occur. So he was stopping short. So if you've spent your whole life working on technique, why would you want to embarrass that by adding a tool or a kit or a training practice that's limiting that technique? In the next incident, similar situation. What we see here is the arm target range is here, but with that little bit of load at high speed, the arm's dropping to here. So it's not hitting the contact point. The contact point is the score is the outcome of the competition. And that range, again, of 2 to 3 inches is the difference between a club karate fighter and a world champion. And so what we see is a small weight moving at high speed has a tremendous impact on technique, and we have to understand that. Loading in the wrong location or just putting a heavy club and swinging with it, 100% that is helping some speed, general level of rotation, but is it doing what you think it's doing in your club swing? And Scott's going to get really into this kind of stuff. Last thing I'll share with you here is we're just going to let the golfers talk. Next 5 minutes, this is Danny Chia. Danny Chia, anybody here in the Asia region knows Danny. He's the first Asian to win a PGA tournament tour out here in Asia. He was on the Asian tour for many years, 2-time Olympian. He's currently in Japan. I'm working with him on a very specific program for his low back and low back pain with EXOGEN for rotation mechanics as he's in the tournament preparation series in Japan. Now, Danny went out, heard about EXOGEN, bought a pair of forearm sleeves. We didn't know it. He tried it, tested it, posted this up on YouTube. We found this, and then we began the relationship after that. So this is literally his first experience, just talking about loading in the arms.
It does say what it does. So I didn't waste my money buying. Hi guys, I'm Danny Chia here. I'm on my way to Saujana Golf and Country Club to WJ Golf Academy to do a review on the product that I just bought. It's called the LILA, I think, LILA Oxygen Sleeve. This product's supposed to help you to boost up your hand speed on your swing. Of course, when your hand swing faster, your club head speed will increase and your ball speed will increase. I'm gonna check it out at the driving range today, so yep, see you guys later. So here we are, we're at the WJ Golf Academy. This is the product that I bought, LILA EXOGEN High Performance Exoskeleton. Okay, let's open it and see what they have inside. Okay, when I open it, I think, so this is the sleeve where you put into your arm. And these are the weight that you attach to them, and then you practice with it. I think the bigger one is about 200 grams. Then the thicker part here, which is the heavier part, and then this is a lighter part. So when during your swing, if you like to have more arm rotation, you actually want to put the heavy side like here, so it helps you to speed up your arms rotation. I think this thing you can adjust yourself where you get the hang of it, and then you kind of like program your own training and then see how it works. I think mainly it works on a lot with the muscle memory. I think it helps build strength with your arm swing. I'm gonna give it a try now, and then we'll see before and after. Does it really increase my arm speed, my club head speed? I'll turn on the TrackMan as well and then see how we go. So as you can see, I've been hitting the ball without anything on. So this will be my club speed for a 7-iron. Now I'm gonna put on some weight and then see does it actually increase or not. So as you can see, I'm putting 600 grams on my right arm and 300 grams on my left. So we'll hit about 20 minutes and then we'll see how it goes. At the moment, it didn't really show much increase. The swings, the club speed pretty much still remain the same. So I'm going to continue to hit for about 20 minutes and then I'll come back, have a look without the weight with my club speed increase or not. Hi, I'm back. So about 20 minutes, still a 20-minute workout with the hitting range boy at the same time. So now without the weight, take out all the weight and then we'll see. I just want to show you guys with the weight on just now, my club speed actually went up 2, maybe a little bit. By right it should, because with the weight helping you for the downswing, it should kind of help your club speed up. So now without the weight, we'll see is it gonna increase or not. So as you can see, these are my club speed before wearing the EXOGEN arm socks. This was wearing the weight. You can see the club speed actually increased a little bit by 1 or 2, and then the last 4 shots was without the weight. Alright, so I think the highest it went up to 89.4 compared to before I wearing it. I think this was the number before I was wearing it. So yeah, it does say what it does. So I didn't waste my money buying. So thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed it.
So it's a great little clip, and as you can see, that was not a paid ad. He called the product every name but its proper name. But what was amazing there is golfers with the weights, and this is something John and Scott are going to jump into. With the weight, they were actually getting longer distance. So people are talking, can you wear this while you're playing? I'm going to leave that to the experts to talk about when they talk about momentum shift, and he was talking about that momentum in the downswing. But we saw an 82 to 84 start, and that was after warm-up. That's not a warm-up effect. He was warmed up already. He'd been hitting balls all morning. He went from 82 to 84 up to 86, 89. Scott found similar numbers his first trial, and that's kind of exciting. What we want to talk about is what happens when you use it long-term. You know, is that that's a normal PAP effect, right? Potentiation effect. You wear something heavy, you take it off, things move faster. At the end of this day, I just want to reinforce this thought. Club head speed, what it really comes down to, it's a sequential outcome. You can't take that out of it. That incorporates optimal range of motion, maximal speed, perfect technique, and razor focus. And today we're getting better, and we've got better tools than the tools we used even 10 years ago to help all those things happen at the same time. So go back to this question. What was missing from that picture? And I think anybody who's got any idea about it knows. Nobody's on a golf course, nobody's holding a club, and nobody's hitting a ball. So if you're going to talk about specific strength training, this may help golf fitness and general training, but how specific is it? Let's jump in with Drs. John Cronin now and Scott Lynn, and we'll see you at the end for our Q&A.
All right. Hi, I'm John Cronin. I'm a professor in strength and conditioning at AUT University and head of research for LILA Movementechnology. First up, to be honest, I'm not a golfer. My golf knowledge is very limited. There's no sport that frustrates me more than golf. I play it once every 3 years and I call it recovery golf. I drive the ball, then I spend most of my time recovering from that drive. So I've got limited knowledge in this area, and I acknowledge that. However, I do know a little bit about wearable resistance, strength and conditioning, and biomechanics, and that's what I want to bring to this session and make you think about how these sciences translate to your golfing game. So hitting the big shot is the name of the presentation. How important is it? Well, have a look at this graph. You most probably can't see what's on the Y and X axis, but on the Y axis is the amount of money won per season. It goes from $0 million to $3.5 million. And this is ball speed along the X axis, 150 to 185, 190 miles per hour. As you can see, those people that earn more money hit the ball faster. If you hit the ball faster, it will translate to greater distance. And you can see a couple of tweets over here, how much 10 yards translates to shots per round, and 20 yards, an increase in 20 yards in driving distance. What does that translate to? 1.2 shots per round. So yeah, it's important. And I think we're seeing it more important in these days as we see some bigger and stronger golfers emerge. So what is more distance in golf about? Well, it's about being physically stronger and or being more technically efficient. And believe it or not, wearable resistance can help with both. And that's what this presentation is going to be about today, to help you to hit the ball longer. Before we get too much into it, I want to talk about a couple of biomechanical concepts that will help us understand how wearable resistance can help your game. This first one is this transfer of momentum principle. Now, momentum equals mass times velocity. So in terms of you as a golfer, you have mass, and therefore how quickly you accelerate or move this mass establishes the momentum in your body. Now, this principle of momentum says what you establish in your body, the momentum you establish in your body transfers to the ball. Okay, it transfers from one object to another. This transference of momentum is established using a ground-up approach where we see the lower body generate the forces against the ground, and then these forces are transferred and added to through the lower body into the torso, into the arms, and then a final terminal velocity in the club. It's got another name called force summation, which means that the terminal acceleration is the sum of all the forces added in the body from large muscle groups to small muscle groups, okay? And this is called a kinematic sequence, and the golf stroke should follow that sequence. And if we see it get out of sequence, then we should do something to correct it, because it's just principle of biomechanics. So we establish momentum in our body. We want to transfer it to the ball. The ball has momentum also, but the ball's mass is set. So therefore, if we increase momentum in the body, the ball velocity will improve or increase, and therefore flight distance. So that's what we're all about in this beginning parts of this session, is look at how we can actually increase momentum in the golfer to transfer it to the ball so there's greater ball speed and therefore flight distance. So how do we increase momentum? Well, simple. Increase mass or increase velocity. How do we increase mass? Well, we can get golfers bigger with diet and training, and we get them stronger. Also, but that's going to take some training. It's going to take some weeks to do that. We can get instant changes in mass by wearing wearable resistance. A fixed wearable resistance to the body, and suddenly there is more mass, you are heavier, and all things being equal, that mass moving at the same velocity will establish more momentum, which will be transferred to the ball, which will go further. How do we increase velocity of movement? Well, we get more technically proficient, or we do activity-specific strength training, such as using wearable resistance, where we put the wearable resistance on. Initially, your golf stroke slows down in velocity, but as you get stronger with the wearable resistance, you return to baseline speeds or stroke mechanics. Then you take the wearable resistance off, and then you should be hitting the ball quicker. We've done one study in this area. This was done a couple of years ago with 5 scratch golfers, or not quite scratch. They had a handicap of 4, so they're pretty good golfers. And what we did, we compared the unloaded strokes to wearable resistance loaded strokes, where the golfers were loaded with 2.8% of their body mass, which you can see on the diagram, has been affixed to the trail side of the golfer. So that's around about 2.8% of her body mass in wearable resistance. What do we find? Well, when we compared the wearable resistance to the unloaded condition, the wearable resistance shot distance increased by 7%, club head speed by 3.5%, the vertical ground reaction forces, or the forces going into the ground on the lead leg, increased by 11%, and the mediolateral ground reaction forces increased by 7.1% on the trail leg. And we postulated that the increase in the shot distance and the club head speed was due to the transfer of momentum from the trail to the lead leg. So we can actually, play around with changing the momentum of golfers in a lot of positions and a lot of body segments. They could be the lower body. We've just talked about a little bit of torso loading and lower body loading. Also here, we can see that the emphasis of this session is around arms. And so that's what the rest of the session is going to talk about, the use of wearable resistance in the arms. First thing that you've got to understand is as soon as we put wearable resistance on the arm mass has changed. Its momentum has changed. And here we see loading of around about 400 grams on a full arm sleeve. So the arm mass has increased by 400 grams. So if the velocity stays pretty much the same, then the momentum in the system has increased, and that should be transferred to the ball to increase flight distance. So, we could go around the course and just put our arm sleeves on when we wanted to drive or hit longer. And theoretically, the physics says we should be able to hit further. What about the strength training aspects? We've just finished a literature review on this, and we found non-specific strength training. That is, where you get out there and you do your gym squats and power cleans, etc. We found the average increase in club head speed was around about 1.6%, and flight distance was 4.8% in 13 studies. That is where we averaged the results from. In terms of non-specific plus golf-specific training, that is combination training, we averaged the effects over 7 studies, and we found that the club head speed increased by around about 3%, and the flight distance by 5.2%. And the average duration of these studies was around about 8 weeks. What about the effects of wearable resistance or sport-specific training? One study, throwing balls, is the only study that we really found that could be, called sport-specific, but not really. But there's no studies out there on the longitudinal effects of wearable resistance on flight distance and club head speed. But you can see the acute effects of 3.5% and 7.2%, I think it was, in terms of flight distance. So we think it's got merit, and we're hoping that there's a lot of research that gets underway investigating the effects of wearable resistance strength training. Now, some of you are saying, well, a light load on the arm, is that really strength training? Well, have a look at this next few slides to try and understand it better. As soon as we put load on the arm, we've increased the mass, which has increased the inertia. That is the resistance to change in motion. That is, the arm is heavier, therefore it's got greater inertia. Therefore, it's going to require greater muscular work to get it going. Okay, if it's requiring greater muscular work, that is a proxy of work over time is power, and it's also a force. It requires greater forces to get it going. So yes, loading the arm is a form of strength training. What we've got to be really aware of, though, is this concept of rotational inertia. You can see the formula down the bottom here. It is I equals mr squared. So the rotational inertia is still a function of mass, but it's a function of how far the mass is away from the axis of rotation. In this example, the axis of rotation is going to be the shoulder joint. So here's a 100-gram load very close to the shoulder joint. And so its rotational inertia, its resistance to angular motion is 2.1%. As soon as we move this load down to mid-arm, we see it's around about 4% increase in rotational inertia. And then down to distal, we see it's 6.5%. Same load, moved down the arm, has increased the rotational inertia and therefore the muscular effort to get it going by 6.5%. So that's quite a substantial overload with a very light weight. And as soon as we start moving these light weights very quickly, we start asking the muscles to work very, very hard. The other thing that you will notice with the wearable resistance systems is the shape of the loading. We can see that there's a fat end or a end where there's a lot of mass, and that's the head or the belly, and we see there's a lighter end. That's called the tail. You can see here in this diagram that we've loaded 400 grams with the heavy ends internally placed, and over here we see them laterally placed. So these two loading patterns will modify the technique. One will cause a little bit of internal rotation. One will cause a little bit of external rotation. Now, so for the coaches out there that are listening to this, we can use wearable resistance, not only to overload and strengthen the stroke or the arm involvement in the stroke, but also we can use it to modify technique. So that's a pretty cool application of it. Not only a strength tool, but a technique tool. What else can wearable resistance provide? Well, it provides movement variability. We can see in this example here on the diagram that there will be different antagonists, agonists, activation, the synergists most probably are working a little bit differently. So that's quite good for conditioning. Also, because we're strengthening the arm or the motion while you're playing golf, there's most probably greater injury resistance given the sport-specific, stroke-specific strength adaptation. Finally, you might have asymmetries or single leg imbalances, or you have athletes that are returning to play or returning to golf. Then you can use wearable resistance to address those imbalances and asymmetries. Okay, in sum, there is benefits to hitting long. I talked about this transfer of momentum, mass times velocity. If we actually establish more momentum in the body, then we can transfer it to the ball for it to travel faster and go further. How can we do that? Well, we get the players bigger and stronger with diet and training, but we can technology dope it straight away by getting them just to wear some wearable resistance. And we can be very targeted in where we cause that pseudo hypertrophy, that pseudo mass gains, whether it be in the forearm, upper arm, one side of the trunk, etc., like that. So have a think about that. Are we allowed to actually use wearable resistance on the golf course? Is it illegal? Can we actually get some technological advantage by just simply putting on various parts and playing the game? The other way we can actually increase the momentum is by increasing the velocity of the stroke, get more technically proficient. Otherwise, do some strength training. And I think, you know, one of the best forms of activity-specific strength training is the use of wearable resistance, where concepts of inertia and rotational inertia help us understand how to strength train the golf athlete. Thanks for listening. If you want to actually follow some of the work that we're doing and follow some of the work that we're doing at AUT Springs, then head to the LinkedIn and Instagram areas or social media platforms. Thanks heaps.
We're back. JC, as always, JC's mic is muted. No, he's back on there. Just sorry for the little technical glitches. Working in the USA, Malaysia, New Zealand, it always presents a little bit of challenge. So thanks so much. Scott, it's great to see you there. It's good to catch up with you today. JC, as always, a very exciting and interesting presentation. We're going to jump into this sort of live session. So for the audience, feel free to post any questions you want onto Facebook. We'll be talking about them as they go in the conversation. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Scott Lynn. Scott, why don't you do a little introduction to yourself? Tell everybody who you are, some of the work you're doing, and yeah, let us get to know you.
All right, I'm originally from Toronto, Canada. I grew up there, did all my schooling in Canada. And after I finished, I did my undergrad, master's, and PhD at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. And then did a short postdoc at the University of Waterloo, and then moved to California I decided actually after my PhD that I wanted to focus on golf biomechanics, and my own country didn't want to give me a job. So I didn't get any jobs in Canada, did get a job in California. So now I'm at California State University, Fullerton, as a full professor there doing research and teaching. I also, in 2015, got connected with a company called Swing Catalyst. They market pressure and force plate technology to golf teachers and golfers. And so it's been a really interesting challenge for me to take a research tool, which is a force plate and a pressure plate, and use it or get the data to the point where I could teach, you know, Joe Blow Golf Pro or Joe Blow Golfer how to look at the data and use it to improve their own golf swing. So it's been an interesting challenge. It's been super fun. I've been able to work with a lot of the top coaches and players in the world, and everybody from, you know, the 40 handicap or the chop golfer to some of the best in the world. So it's been a really interesting challenge. It's been really fun, and it allows me to do stuff like this to investigate new and different technologies and play around in a game that I love.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't know you were from Canada. I just found that out.
Really?
A good thing to get that bio. Yeah. Hey, from your accent, though, I thought just like a Midwest. It sounded like an Ontario accent.
I think it's I don't know, it's a mishmash now. My oots and a boots have gone away since I moved to California.
Speaking of California and the U.S. And the world, just quickly, it's quite exciting because COVID's presented a lot of challenges in a lot of areas in sport. But one thing we've seen is a massive increase in participation in golf. I think golf, cycling, running are the fastest growing sports on the planet right now, obviously because they lend themselves to physical distancing and to continuing activity. But it's pretty amazing to see this happening.
Yeah, I mean, every golf teacher that I have worked with told me they had their busiest summer this summer. And a lot of them were shut down for the start of the summer as well, this summer out here. And so, you know, there was some courses were shut for 6 weeks, up to 2 months maybe. And they still, in less time, made more money because a lot of people are taking up the game and trying to learn how to play. So, my girlfriend's actually a golf teacher, and she said a bunch of parents brought their kids in and said, hey, soccer's canceled this summer. Can you teach my son how to play golf? Or football's canceled or whatever it is. And so, yeah, it's a game that you can play. You can be outdoors where, you know, obviously we're a lot safer outdoors, and you can be distanced. I mean, golf does not require us to be close to any other human. So you can be outdoors in nature and get a little walk in and a little competition. And, you know, us former athletes who played other sports a lot of times take that up when we're too old to play our rugby or our football or whatever it is that we played as younger people.
It's funny, and anybody who's watched The Last Dance with Michael Jordan knows exactly how competitive golf is. And you're right.
Yeah.
If you've got that real mean competitive twitch in you, it seems like golf is that next one that provides that without the beating up of the physical training of your sport.
Yeah, that's the cool part about it. I mean, I started playing when I was, I think it was 3 years old. Funny story. My dad bought me. My dad was a big golfer, and then I have a younger brother who's 18 months younger than me, and an older brother who's like 2 years older than me. And my mom was like, "You're not going to the course for 6 hours on a Saturday and leaving me with these three little monsters." So my mom made him quit when we were young, and so his goal was to get us into golf as quickly as possible so that he could go back and play. So I was a 3-year-old, and I got a little 3-wood, a little wooden 3-wood for Christmas. I opened it up in Christmas in Canada. Obviously, you know, you can't play golf for another 4 months or so. So my mom was like, "Worst gift ever," because I was running around the house smashing stuff with my 3-wood for for 4 months or whatever it was.
Doors smashing the house.
Yeah, worst gift ever. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So moving this forward a little bit about now, you obviously you've been in the golf game a long time, but your experience with EXOGEN is only recent. Tell us a little bit about how you came to first connect with us with EXOGEN, and what were some of your first thoughts when you got it? Again, you know, the one thing we've seen, we put some of this product out there. We're getting a lot of feedback on the word gimmick. People use that. Of course, everything in its dog can improve club head speed in the world of golf. But just, you know, helping people understand a little bit about what you thought and what your first exposure was.
Yeah, I think John contacted me. I think John and one of my colleagues at Fullerton, Andy Galpin, worked together on some things, or you know each other from NSCA conferences or whatever it was. So I think we got connected through that connection. And I think I was sent the arm sleeves and the weights. I don't remember when that was. Was it July or was it June, John? Do you remember?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Somewhere around there, yeah. So I just started playing with it because, you know, myself being a golfer, I put it on and started hitting some balls with it. And to me, your scientific mind just goes berserk because there's so many permutations and combinations of the amount of mass you can put on, where you can put that mass, how you can orient the mass. There's just so many different ways you could use it. And what we're finding in golf is everybody does it slightly differently. So, you know, the old way back in the 90s was you go for a golf lesson, they'd put you next to Tiger Woods on the screen, and clearly you're not Tiger Woods. And so I think we messed up.
Share screen, right? And you were trying to match his stroke.
You're trying to match his positions. And to me, that's, you know, obviously nobody on the planet is Tiger Woods. Everybody's different than him. And I think we messed up a lot of golfers by forcing them to swing in a way that, and really the cool part about golf now, if you're familiar with it, there's a lot of weird golf swings now on tour playing at the highest level. So a guy like Matthew Wolf, who comes from California here, has a really strange looking golf swing, but he's one of the longest guys out there. And so I think we're starting to realize that there's different ways to make this happen, and really good coaches are starting to leave those little nuances in there, and these guys are becoming pros, and we're starting to learn, hey, that little thing that guy does maybe isn't wrong. Maybe it works for some people. And my scientific mind tells me it's a game of cluster analysis. So trying to figure out, you know, what are the things that work for you. There's a really famous ad here, like a advertisement on TV where, because Arnold Palmer also had a really crazy swing. And the ad is swing your swing. Don't swing somebody else's swing, swing your swing. But a lot of people are like, oh, what the heck is my swing? How do I know how I'm supposed to swing it? And so I've done a lot of work with a really famous golf professional here in the United States called Mike Adams. And he has a system of testing people to see what their optimal swing is. So he measures something about your anthropometrics. He measures something about your fundamental patterns of movement. It has a series of tests that determine what your optimal kinematics and kinetics will be in your swing, and guides the swing towards that. And so he's the first golf instructor that I know that has that type of system. And that's where my mind always goes when I come to something like this, is I wonder, you know, what certain type of golfers would react to certain type of stimulus. And, you know, maybe loading the trail arm in a certain type of golfer, or loading the lead arm in another type of golfer, or, you know, putting the weights on in the way that the fat end is proximally or distally, or all those things, you know, altering that moment of inertia, is something we're starting to learn about. And so I think we're getting close to, you know, really starting to understand what is the optimal swing for every single human based on their anthropometrics and their their fundamental patterns of movement. And can those be changed? Yes, 100%. Like we could go to the gym and change those if we wanted to. Most of the regular golfers, you know, the Saturday golfers are not going to do that, right? So we're just going to try to make what you have right now work, where, you know, the guys on tour might go to the gym and really work on their patterns to try to, you know, alter the type of swing that they have. But you're seeing a lot of strange swings out there, which means a lot of people are going with kind of what's natural for them. And I think it's really cool how coaches are leaving that in there. You know, things that, you know, in the past, a coach might have said, oh, no, you can't do it that way. You got to change. You got to look like Tiger. You got to look like Nick Faldo. That's something that is changing now. And people are leaving these little nuances in there, and these guys are becoming really good. And now we're starting to think, hey, maybe some of that stuff could work for other people. So yeah, I think there's so much potential for this wearable resistance but it has to go through this process of understanding how it works for you. And, you know, I work a lot with a motor learning specialist here in Los Angeles named Dr. Will Wu, and he talks about the Goldilocks principle. And so it would be, you know, put a heck of a lot of weight on, put a little amount of weight on, or put it really proximal, put it really distally, and hit balls and see which one's better for you. And we do that quite a bit. We say, you know, load 100% on your trail side, load only 50% on your trail side. Which one do you think was a little bit better? Oh, okay, that one's kind of better. Okay, well, let's try to. And so, do you guys know Goldilocks? Is that a story? You know it if you're from Canada, but have you heard of that, John?
Yep.
Okay, I was working with the LPGA golfer from Mexico, and she looked at me like I had 10 heads when I said Goldilocks. She didn't know. That's not a story, or that's not a fable, or whatever that thing is. She's in her 20s, younger, but I think there are cultures, and I was in Asia too. I think I was in Korea, and I mentioned that word, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" I guess that story doesn't exist.
Yes, Goldilocks, no.
No. So, but yes. That is, I mean, that's the kind of thing that I think we're going to start to mess around with, because in some of the research we've already done on it, like some people got unbelievable results. Some people were hitting it straighter and further, and other people not so much. And so maybe they just had too much resistance, not enough resistance. Maybe it was oriented a little differently than they would need it. There's so many factors that come into play, but I think once we start looking at this cluster analysis thing that we're doing with golfers, we're going to get a lot better at prescribing it for each individual.
John, you want to talk a little bit about that? Like you said, cluster analysis and you touched on something interesting there, Scott, is we have to go through this process. Like I said in my short clip, there was a guy that was working as the head of education. They were trying to get 100 suits on the entire NFL draft. And at that time, again, he said, you know, everybody has been trying to figure out how to glue weight on the body. You figured it out finally, but now we got to figure out how to use it, because two things that are really critical for everybody who knows the science behind training is, you know, there's the laws and principles of training and periodization. And the two most critical for me are always individualization, specificity. And that means individualization is exactly as you touched on. You have to treat every person unique. And like you said, when you start training, changing mechanics in a body, that body's probably had a long time to adapt to those mechanics. So you change a rotation pattern that's different than the way they want to swing, you might improve the golf swing, but you're going to have a lower back issue, or you're going to have a knee issue, or you could have a structural problem there that you don't fully understand. And so, you know, and the point being, you have to work with what's in front of you. You have to work with the individual. Like we said, everything comes in that package. And then specifically, you know, they have to work it into their sport. John, talking about where we are right now, with you're talking about cluster analysis. We're at this early stage of understanding wearable resistance. And it seems simple because we're putting these weights on a forearm sleeve and saying, oh, okay, that's not so complex. But nobody's ever really done this. And moving it from an internal pattern to an external pattern, or a proximal pattern to the elbow, or distal to the elbow, or the posterior part of the arm to the anterior part. Those little subtle changes, we literally have never been able to do before. And so, John, you know, because you're seeing this across all sport. I mean, we're working with everybody from Paris Saint-Germain to Golden State Warriors in different sports. And everybody's asking the same question: how do I do it? And I got a question here from Brian Gott. Brian's one of our customers out there in the USA. And he asked, is there going to be specific protocols for wrist rotations for somebody? You know, there's so much we could do. Where do we need to start? Where are we starting? And what do you guys see happening in terms of progressing in the understanding of wearable resistance in golf? Maybe.
I mean, I think, yeah, to address his question, I mean, a lot of people are talking about that, the rate of closure of the club, like how quickly that club closes through impact. And And a lot of people assumed, you know, that a better golfer would have a lower rate of closure, right? Because then the club is square a lot longer. But that's not the case. There's some golfers whose mechanics require a high rate of closure. There's some golfers whose mechanics require a low rate of closure. So it's a cluster analysis game as well. And so if you're a golfer who requires a lower rate of closure, you might, and this is the thing, I don't know. I mean, we found, and I can show you one example where we put 400 grams on an individual's lead arm, and he actually squared the club up and closed the club a lot more effectively with the weight on. So that impetus or that signal in his body that this thing weighs a lot, I better get it around the corner, actually made him hit it better and further. And so you never know how everybody's brain is gonna respond to loading. And I think we put it on his trail arm and it didn't work as well. So he was kind of a lead arm dominant rotator through impact, and that he probably needed a little more rotation. And it was interesting that I think when we took the weight off, he actually didn't have he did it better with the weight on. And most people would assume, you know, kind of like the and you know, that's something that, you know, we've done some work at Cal State Fullerton on, like loading a bat, right, putting like a weight on a baseball bat, and most of the time you swing it slower, right, because the weight's on the bat, and then you take the weight off, and because you're used to moving it slower, you move slower afterwards too. So the idea of swinging something heavy because you're going to swing it faster afterwards has actually been disproven. Yeah. And we've had both. From our little study we did originally, we had both. We had some people that put the weight on, and when they took it off, they went faster. I'll show an example of that. We had some people who went way faster with the weights on. So I think, you know, every brain's different, and every brain responds to stimulus different, and we got to work with. I like to say human beings are messy, right? We all got different movement patterns and that have got us to here. We all have different restrictions, different joints. We all have different ways that our brain, you know, analyzes different stimulus. And so your goal is to kind of work out that messiness for you. And I think that's why that Goldilocks principle is great. Just try a lot, try a little, try it here, try it there, and find the best one that works for you. And eventually I think we'll get more scientific about it and be able to, you know, prescribe it better. Like say, hey, when you buy this thing, do this little test, and if this, do that, and if that, do that. I think that'll be a little kind of choose your own adventure, wearable resistance kind of thing.
Well, and two points I'll make on that is, see, we've got very good basic guideline. And the interesting thing is, I've worked with, I can't even begin to list the hundreds of coaches and elite programs around the world. And I used to start and go in there and teach them or try and connect to their sport. And I realized we don't do that anymore because they have something very specific on their mind and they know their sport. My job as the creator of the kit and the person who understands the programming with Wearable was to teach them how to use the product. How do you introduce it so you can find that pattern? And that's where we say there's 6 kind of basic loading patterns, you know, anterior part of the body, posterior part, whether that's the chest and the back, the thigh, or the hamstring. Put the load there, proximal or distal. So you put it up near the joint, far away from the joint. And then the other one you mentioned with the belly is internal or external loading. You try those 3-4 patterns, switch it around as you're swinging a golf for 10 minutes, and bingo, the light will go off, as you know. And then all of a sudden you're like, wow, that really improves this thing because my problem is my lead hand. Somebody else is like, that's not my issue at all. My issue is the shoulder and the elbow dropping. And when I load here, I really feel it helps. So this is what just to clarify something for people, maybe John, you could talk about this in terms of movement analysis, because it now relates to the question of, does this affect my swing negatively? Because we're now talking about tweaking the body. And I always use the example of car tire rebalancing, right? When you go down, when your tire's out of balance, that big 30 kilo, 50, 60 pound tire spinning at very high rotation takes a small margin to put that thing off balance, like the body swinging at high speed. You go down to the tire shop and that guy takes a 5 gram or, you know, 1/10 of an ounce load, puts it on the exact right location, and all of a sudden that system spins perfectly. And that's what EXOGEN's like. We're not just tweaking. We're not just doing weight training anymore. We're coaching, and we're positively affecting technique with specific speed and power directly in the swing. And John, you know, this is something where this is probably our first step, really is our first step. And I think, Scott, your work is about that now. Where do we want to put it in the body? And what are the different effects have an outcome on factors that are important to a golfer? Because as we said, club shot distance is not, it's on its own. It's closing, it's club head speed, it's so many factors. And maybe John, just comment a little bit on this whole thing around the kinematics of wearing wearable resistance and what we're finding.
Yeah, like I guess, you know, the two bits of research that we have done sort of make things a little bit clearer to me. You know, if we're looking for the shot distance, I don't think we're going to be using wearable resistance on the arm. Okay, I think that's more subtle. That's like you say, your closure rates. I think I love where Scott came from there. You know, we've got a tendency in research just to try and find those average effects. But when we had a look at this data in an individual level, it was all over this place. Apart from carry side distance, we saw an effect for carry side distance with 8 out of the 9 players, where the trail arm either opened them up. I think it opened them up. Scott, correct me if I'm wrong. 8 out of the 9 times with the 200 or 400 gram loads. That was about the only consistent effect we saw, but it's certainly not the panacea to hitting long. That's more subtle in terms of the closure rates, I think, with the arm loading. Where I think, you know, we need to go, and that other study showed it, we're only using around about 0.5% of body mass on the arm. So in terms of the momentum that I've been talking about, yeah, it's going to have a pretty much a minimal effect. But if we're actually starting to look at the torso and the legs and putting quite large masses on them, 2 to 3, 4% body mass, then I think we're getting quite macro, less subtle, and those are the things that most probably can have a greater effect on shot distance. So
yeah, I mean, but the golf is such a game of minute little differences, like the difference between, you know, hitting it 300 down the middle and hitting it in the jungle, you know, is very small. There's not much change that needs to be. And I think some of the changes that we saw were not minute changes. I mean, some of the stuff that we saw were significant changes. Because we're seeing, you know, I mean, the guy that you showed earlier, Joe, had, I think it was 4 or 5 miles per hour clubhead speed increase. And they always say it's about 2.5 yards per mile an hour. And so, you know, if they're 4 or 5 miles an hour with 2.5 yards per mile an hour, that's, you know, a significant change. That's a whole club difference they're hitting into the green. And if they're a whole club difference longer off the tee and a whole club difference hitting into the green, they're hitting their wedge versus their 8-iron. And nobody on the planet hits their 8-iron closer to the hole than their wedge. It gives you a massive difference. And that's why we're seeing guys on, well, maybe you do. We're seeing guys on tour now, like Bryson DeChambeau, with just such a huge advantage because he's so much further up the fairway or up the hole than the rest of the people. So even if he's in the rough, it doesn't matter because he's got a sand wedge versus a 7-iron or whatever. So it does make a big difference, especially in today's game. And so even some of the preliminary things we've seen, I think I wouldn't consider them to be minor differences.
Yeah, just on that, Scott, you had mentioned earlier you had something you wanted to share with us on that.
Sure, let me show you. So what John showed, what Sean alluded to there a second ago, let me share my screen here. So I just had this little, let me start the
this is exactly what we're talking about.
There's my information if you guys want to get in touch. That's the Swing Catalyst logo there and my university right there. But so this was one guy, actually a really good player that I tested, really strong guy who was hitting a 7-iron, and you can see these carry distances for 7-irons are pretty impressive to start with. But you can see his initial pattern, the baseline testing, he had a significant rightward bias, and you can see a lot of these shots don't curve too much. They're just kind of straight push to the right. And what we know about a shot that pushes to the right means the path and the face, so the way the club is moving through impact and where the face of the club is pointing are both pointed to the right. And so you hit kind of a straight push to the right. So for him to fix, you can see how all of these are going to the right, most not curving too much, to now basically every single one painted down the middle line, and even one had a little bit of a draw to it. And let me get these, our faces are in the way here, you can hard to see. And you can see the carry distance now. I mean, if you average those up, it's definitely a full club or even more longer than they were before. So he's a club longer and he's also straighter. So putting that resistance unilaterally on the left arm allowed him to straighten out his club face, which is, I think, a lot to do with, you know, kind of pronation, supination of the wrist through impact, or I mean, it could be a whole bunch of different things that cause that. We didn't measure the body motions or how he accomplished this goal, but he's also changed the path of his club because, you know, if he had the same path out to the right and just closes the club face, that thing would curve significantly to the left, which it did a little bit here, but the rest of them were pretty straight. So one of the hypotheses I had when I first put it on was that it might alter how we use our lower body, because John said, you know, the momentum begins from the ground, right? And that's why our force plates that we sell with Swing Catalyst have been so effective. Is if we alter what we do to the ground, a lot of times that can change where our arms are and how much we speed up the club and all those things, because everything starts from the ground up. And there's some pretty funny videos online of golfers trying to swing with their feet on ice. And I can show one if you want to, but if you Google it, there's, you know, it's not a very effective way to swing on ice, because if your feet slip, you can't get that.
You've played hockey. You've been on an ice rink with a pair of boots and a pair of skates. And when your skates are dug in, your slap shot's fast. When you're on boots, your slap shot's good, but you're on your ass.
You got no chance. Yeah. So, I think, I think it might change if you put a lot of weight distally on the arms. Your arms might feel so heavy, you got to use your body differently to get so if you're trying to overpower with the small muscles, the small distal muscles.
This was arm loading, yeah? So that is.
Yeah, this was arm, yeah.
JC mentioned, because one thing we do see is that the arm loading is the right place, or maybe you can comment on this, because maybe the mechanics into the body. I'll use an example which is very similar to golf, and I know this because I cross-pollinate across sport, not only as a boxer myself, but I worked with a lot of combat sports, and you know, we're doing a lot of work in combat right now. The rotation for a lot of punches is the exact same rotation movement in golf. And it's one of the reasons why martial artists, specifically boxers, translate into golf very well, and a lot of them play it. And they're good at it, certainly in the power, because it's ground-based momentum mechanics. The rotation from the hip creates the power. This is why boxers and martial artists don't spend a lot of time building bulk in their arms. And specifically, good boxing coaches will say, never get a pump. If you're pumping up, you're reducing speed. That's not what you want. And so when we talk about that, we do see that a lot of the movement through the rotation in the core really helps accentuate good hip rotation. But still, there's a tremendous amount of value to having that load in the forearms as a starting point. Even the simple way, like you said, the weekend golfer, it gets a little technical. You know, are you going to put on a top and shorts? If you're getting into specific issues, yeah, they're great to have. But a great starting place is with the forearm sleeve and getting some light loading in there to sort of work on that mechanic and that momentum shift. Would you agree, Scott?
Yeah, 100%. And if I show you here, we actually do have some evidence that, and we'll look into, you know, some of the other stuff we've done. But if I load up our Swing Catalyst software here, this was one of the first subjects we did, and you can see my Leaf jerseys in the background there. You can tell I'm.
Maple Leaf, JC, Toronto Maple Leaf.
That's ice hockey, in case you're wondering. Yeah. So this is Brendan. Brendan runs a YouTube site called Be Better Golf, and we've done lots of work with him. And pretty interesting. You'll see here his pre-swing here baseline before. So he did his full warm up. He did what he would normally do before he played, and he hit 5 shots baseline. And this was one of the baseline shots. They were all around the same 88 mile per hour club head speed. And one measure that I thought was really cool, by just putting weights on his arms, that he changed, was his torque. So if we take him to kind of his peak torque that we measure from the force plate, what happens when you create your peak torque? What we know from golf is it's kind of Newton's law, action reaction, right? So he's actually pushing his lead foot towards the ball, and creating an action force in this direction, which creates a reaction force that shoves his lead hip backwards and creates that rotation. And he's actually trying to pull his trail foot away from the ball, which shoves his trail hip forwards and creates the rotation. So it's Newton's third law in action there, creating equal and opposite forces on other sides, kind of a force couple idea. And so that's what we measure here with this torque value. And you can see his maximum torque was 40 foot-pounds of torque, or we do it in a relative form. So that's the peak torque divided by their body weight in kilograms, is 0.65. And that created, you know, an 88.1 mile per hour club head speed. And then after he did all the training with the weights on and took the weights off at the end, his speed went up, you know, almost 5 miles an hour. Wow. And you can see now his torque also increased by 25% or so. And so you can see now he's creating a lot more rotational force on the ground. So now he's up to 0.82 or 50 foot-pounds of torque. So we didn't tell him anything about the lower body. We just put those things on and let him hit balls. And at the end of it, he's 5 miles an hour, almost faster, and he's creating more rotational force from the ground. I don't know too many golf instructors that would say those aren't good things.
Yeah.
I don't know any, actually.
Now, interesting. You got a question and you answered it, Brian. You were asking. Brian got. You asked about what happens when the weight comes off, and thank you, because you went through that. Now, just to clarify for people, there's two effects with something like EXOGEN, a wearable resistance. You can put it on, you train with it, and it has what we call, if you don't know the science, they call it potentiation. And potentiation means it potentiates something, it accelerates it, it increases something, and that's basically the action. So you put it on, you warm up with it, like as you mentioned before, putting a donut on a baseball bat, and then taking that load off and then swinging. And the theory is, you know, you're going to swing faster. So people might be wondering, well, do I use this in a warm up before a game or before a range? But ultimately, weight training, as we know, people potentiate with weight training all over the world. Sprinters before the Olympic final are in the back doing squats for a reason, because it's priming that muscle. And they come out and they smash the race. But there's also the training effect. The most effective use of resistance training is I train with it for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. And then to create a permanent change and a consistent change. Maybe both of you talk a little bit about this, because we see a lot of this really cool potentiation, which tells us something very exciting is happening. But now we're in the game of looking at, well, what's going to happen over time? You know, and John, I don't know if both you guys are working on that, and maybe, because this was, like you said, literally that was Brendan's very first trial.
Yeah, so that was, I mean, these swings were, I don't know, 20 minutes apart or so after doing the training. So he hit, how many conditions do we have, John? I can't remember. There was 6 or 7 loading conditions.
Yeah, I think that there was 8.
Yeah, so there was 8 total, but I think 6 of them were loading, and there was a pre and a post. So, so there were 6 loaded conditions. So yeah, I mean, in the span of, you know, whatever number of shots that is, 30 shots or so, to see these changes without telling them anything to do differently, it's a pretty big change. And so that could be something, like you said, like you know, the sprinter or the hockey player who's doing squats, you know, before the game or whatever, just to get, I think a lot of times it's to activate their nervous system, right? Not really, they're not going to change anything muscularly. It's going to change how their nervous system is reacting. And this could do the same thing. This could lock him in and get his technique down for that day. It's where, you know, where you might change muscles is over time, where you do it for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever. Yeah. And so that would be more a neural activation thing I think you do on the driving range before with this. And there are lots of guys using the speed sticks. So there's a company that makes like weighted golf clubs, and they call them speed sticks. And there's actually overweighted and underweighted ones. So it's the overspeed and whatever underspeed. What's the opposite of overspeed training? Yeah, slower training, whatever. Weighted or loaded training. And so there's a lot of guys using those on the driving range. A ton of pros use that, you know, prior to hitting balls and warming up for their rounds and trying to activate their nervous systems basically to get them ready to go and primed. And this could be something exactly the same. And then there's other people that are doing, you know, protocols over time, like, you know, periodized programs with them over 6, 8 weeks, whatever it is. And this could be the same thing as well. So both of those are really possible. I think you've asked me in the past whether this would be possible to wear like during a round or during a competition, and I don't know the answer to that. I don't think it would be allowed. I think right now, I know you can, I mean, you can put on a jacket or take off a jacket, and that's not like, there's no regulations, I don't think, for clothing, but I think once you put the weights on it, you're going to get yourself in trouble with the golf regulation bodies. So, but anywhere on the driving range beforehand, I think would be, or you know, training with it, you know, during your practice would be totally fine.
Yeah, JC, just on that a little bit on the longitudinal versus the acute studies that we're doing as well. Like Scott said, the one thing we've seen is we know from other sports, like some of the sprint programs we work with, combat. I mean, we're working with really exciting sports, every Olympic discipline there is, and we see that generally we tell people work on a technical issue before you start working on a conditioning issue. So if there's a technical issue, like in sprinting, it might be an understride or an overstride or a rotation or a posture. Because the EXOGEN can be used technically, you don't want to just work on conditioning and swinging for more power when there's a technical issue, because that'll just be exasperated anyway. So for sure, I think what you had mentioned is, most people know their technical issue, and we can tweak and get into that and create some stability and consistency around that before you actually start hammering load after load and making it a conditioning tool. And JC, we're starting to look at long-term studies. We've got several in other sports, but it really is the next place for us in golf, correct?
Yeah, like I believe it's what Scott's sort of talked to. We've got, we've studied running and sprinting, as you know, Joe, to the nth degree. And we know if you've got a step frequency problem, we'd load like this. If you've got a step length problem, you'd load like this. If you've got these, if you want to increase or decrease the braking phase, you'd load like this. And I guess that's where we've got to go to next with the golf is, understand that there's a lot of nuances in the golf stroke, and there's those individual differences. And then how can we use the wearable resistance to assist, correct, or exaggerate a problem to correct, or, I guess that's where we're at. And then we've got to take that into a longitudinal design to see if it actually, what we've put into an acute sense actually sticks, and whether it makes a difference in the long term, because we can make these acute changes to the motor program, but whether it actually changes as like a technical type of adaptation or a strength power type of adaptation is, the gold is in the longitudinal. So,
hey guys, just because we actually got a ton of questions here, and I apologize to anybody that's watching because we've been talking about it, but I want to jump into a couple, and this is a really interesting one because it touches on what both of you talked about. This is from Josh Target. Josh, thanks for your question. He said, has there been any data collected on the trade-off between an increase in mass leading to an increase in momentum versus a decrease in angular velocity due to more inertia? I'll leave that for anybody who might want to jump.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an individualized thing. I mean, I think like John said, obviously, not putting on mass doesn't necessarily equal a better golf swing. There's tons of examples of players who put on a ton of mass and swung it worse. There's tons of examples of players who've lost a ton of mass and swung it worse. And so I think it's such a technical game, and it's not just about pure speed. You have to control it. You have to know where it's going. So there's always that trade-off, that accuracy versus speed trade-off. But and it's so individualized. The way that I speed up the club is going to be way different from how you speed up the club, and so it's not that simple. You can't just use Newton's laws and say, hey, just add some mass or add some velocity and you're going to get more momentum and everything will be great. There's different ways to do it, and I've seen people try to increase speed and get slower actually because they do it in the wrong way or the way that doesn't work for them. So it's not always as simple as those equations make it seem.
No, you're right, and it's technical. It's focus. It could even be on the day. You show up at the range one day and your just focus is a little bit off. We talk, ball placement on that club face is just a little bit off. I mean, you're right. And this is why I think it's exciting that we've got tools that we're putting into the actual game so you can work on all these components, because on the day of a competition, you can't take any of those factors out and you can't tell the crowd to stop talking. You can't take the wind away.
You can't tell the crowd to stop talking. They shouldn't be talking. Your caddy can go give them. That is one thing you can do.
All the factors are there, right? And you need to train for those factors. And there's a comment that came in. Ben Shear, John and I are in conversation right now. Of course, Ben was a connection for you. Ben, thanks for your comment. He just said, again, what we're all seeing. Guys, I think over time we'll need to figure out where the loads go based on a couple of key factors: grip, posts, and type of shot, whether you're a fade or draw. And again, these are technical. This is not just holding a heavy club or a cable and swinging. That's very technical, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's Ben and I actually have been texting while you guys were presenting and coming up with some ideas of different things we'd want to look at, because Ben and I have both we worked together a lot, and we've studied a lot of this kind of stuff together and come up with some some of these clustering ideas and saying, if they have this type of grip, what would be the optimal loading pattern? And if they, have this type of posting style, which is how their lower body basically works, what would be the optimal loading pattern? And so, so that's basically talking about that cluster analysis ideas that Mike Adams was the pioneer of kind of starting to talk about. So anybody watching who hasn't heard of Mike Adams or any of his stuff, I highly recommend you look it up because it's really cool stuff.
Yeah. John, anything else to add to that?
The only thing is, I said right at the beginning of the presentation, I knew very little about golf, and this presentation has confirmed it. and I thank Scott for that. I'm going to leave this webinar a lot more wiser about golf, and that's for certain, Scott. So yeah, no, thanks very much for your wisdom, and yeah.
This will relate, because the general question is certainly something you know as well. This comes from Seth de Guzman. Seth, thanks for the question. Does shoulder strength and grip strength have a factor on the proper hitting of the ball, or is it purely technique? So how can the resistance help in golf? Now, my slide, I said at the end of the day, your golf distance, your shot distance is specific strength, some factor, technique, and focus. Technique and focus being the most important features. So getting some specific strengthening is important, but I think what people get confused often is we hear the word strength, and then we say, I need strength. So I go do strength training. But just strength training, it's as specific as technique training.
Sure. And I mean, if you talk about, John talked about the kinematic sequence, which a lot of people talk about in golf, which, and we know from, a lot of our muscle physiology work that muscles are strongest when working eccentrically rather than concentrically. So if you use your kinematic sequence properly and your thorax rotates towards the target and your arm stays still, you eccentrically load the posterior side of that shoulder. I mean, so eccentric training for the posterior side of the shoulder to create that whipping action is something that would be super important. And there's a lot of biomechanists who've talked about that a lot as a speed gain in the golf swing. It's for some people not. And that's the thing with the kinematic sequence. When I first started doing golf research, everybody assumed you needed a perfect kinematic sequence to hit it great. But then we got all the best players in the world, and like, I think 30% of them or so have a perfect sequence, and 60% of them don't. 60% of them have little things where biomechanically we'd look and say that's inefficient, but for that person, I don't think it is. Because again, human beings are messy. They do different things, and when you start seeing what the best in the world do, it's sometimes things that may not seem so biomechanically perfect in kind of our optimized, Newton's laws way, might work for that human, and you try to make it different and you might make them worse. So human beings are incredible machines, and how our nervous systems and our muscles and our tendons and everything work together to create movement is a pretty incredible thing. And so, but that would be something that I've heard, when he talked about shoulder strength, it would be eccentric strength of the posterior side of the lead shoulder, which is going to create that whipping action into impact, which is a possibility of a speed gain for some people.
But just think of that answer you gave. That is a very specific strength outcome. And let me ask you both this then, because I think I've got a couple of questions here. Noor Hisham, he's one of our customers here. He's been using this product for the last 12 weeks. I know he's hitting consistently over 250 right now, and he's really excited with the forearm sleeves. And he's just asking for other areas to possibly engage it into his technique session on the range. Another one has asked about the health benefits of this in terms of the golf game and improving overall health. But what I want to ask is, when we take a look at the tools in the toolbox. So in my presentation, I showed a slide with a lot of general resistance tools, cable tubing in the gym, a weighted club, and maybe just general strengthening for shoulders and stabilities and dumbbells and kettlebells. In your opinion, we've talked about this transfer tool. And to be honest, when I created EXOGEN, I was creating a transfer tool. I was working with sprinters on the track who were dragging sleds, pulling weights, doing all these things that messed up the mechanics because we were trying to work on some aspect of specific strength. And of course, the sled thing is a big controversial area in speed as well. But I was looking at speed mechanics and thinking, how do we load the body so the mechanics can stay the same? And because he does need squats, you know, a sprinter will need to do some level of resistance training or traditional training. Does a golfer? Where would we start? Where does this fit as a tool in the toolbox, Scott? And what do you think, you know, what kind of suggestions and thoughts do you have around this? Because like I said, you're using this with your own clubs, hitting your balls on a driving range, and you're tracking club path, you're tracking speed. You're not just sitting there swinging, looking at a weight stack or, you know, a load of pounds or newtons in force.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you completely that, like, you know, old school strength training can actually mess up your technique in a lot of sports. I did a lot of work with the golf teams at my university, and when they first started training in the gym, they had, you know, strength coaches who didn't know anything about golf, and they were doing Olympic lifting. And so a lot of our golfers are doing this Olympic lifting and those cleans and they're getting these shrug motions happening. And if you think about it, if you stand there and you shrug your shoulder, you're further away from the ball. And so you got to get closer to it somehow to hit it. And so we're starting to see that, you know, that type of motion is just death move in golf, and you need to, and so training it in the gym is probably not very smart, although it's a good athletic move. You know, now people are doing like hex bar deadlifts and stuff like that, where doesn't take that type of, you can still get the lower body power without, you know, having that upper body shrug kind of thing, which makes the mechanics really difficult. So and I think there's so much to learn there. I mean, my brain always goes to loading more proximity, like loading the pelvis, like that the study that you showed, John, where the load was a lot, you know, all over the body. But I mean, loading the pelvis, I think, to me, and that's where I always go with training ground reaction forces. I'll attach bands and stuff to the pelvis and get them to try to use their legs to push their pelvis in a different direction. And so that to me would be a really interesting place to start with, just for, you know, general health, is getting the proximal part of the body moving well and let the arms come along for the ride, which I think the arm sleeves actually do for a lot of people, right? If you load up the arms, I think their brains say, hey, I can't swing my arms super fast because they're heavy as heck. I got to use these bigger muscles now a lot more efficiently.
Well, now go back to that Danny. Now, Danny Chia clip that was in my presentation, as you saw, and he said you looked at his 3 speeds. So he had unloaded at the start. He was swinging around. I think the number was 82 to 84 miles an hour, and that was warmed up. Then loaded, he was starting in that 85, 86. Then unloaded, he was starting to hit in those 88s, 89s. So he said he was actually faster with a bit of loading. And this is a really interesting thing, because we see this even with sprinters. A small amount of load, and we are talking about ounces here and grams, right? A small amount of load can increase initial speed or some level of speed, but it very quickly changes that. My karate example was the same thing. We were seeing those martial artists moving at the fastest speeds possible with their arms. 100 grams stabilized speed. They felt like they could actually be a little quicker with that. But when they got to 2 to 3 to 4, now they were being significantly challenged. And this is exciting. We see that, and that's why people say, I've done this with the golfers. They go through a trial, and then they look at me and they're like, can I use this in a game? Because they're hitting a little more stable, they're hitting a little further. But then it doesn't take much, as we talked about, to make that a different equation. And
right, and you'll see that where it kind of goes off the cliff eventually. So because they had a female participant or two and 400 grams on your forearm doesn't sound like a lot, but it really, I mean, and they were, you know, smaller females, and yeah, I think they were overpowered by it, and they really slowed down when they got 400 grams on there. So again, it's individualized. You gotta Goldilocks it to figure out what's best for you. And I think, you know, our job, John and my, and hopefully if Ben Shear gets involved too, will be to give you guide you better towards your Goldilocks answer when you get the stuff arriving in the mail or wherever.
Well, okay, here's two last questions, then we're gonna have to wrap. We've got one from Scott Shepard. Scott, I saw you on the Facebook there earlier. Thanks for joining us, mate. His question, again, for both of you, have you compared the effects of proximal limb loading with EXOGEN versus distal loading? That's an area we've been talking a lot about. Like distal loading with the speed sticks and their effects on technique. I'm currently using the forearm sleeves, and I see technical improvements as a major factor for using these versus other implements. So he's talking about specificity. You know, the speed stick takes away from your specific swing, whereas the EXOGEN, because it's internalized, allows you to maintain that. And What do you think about those two things as a specific tool?
I mean, I've seen both create positive effects for golfers. So I've seen speed sticks create more speed in people. And I think a lot of times, you know, if you take anything and try to swing it faster, well, you might swing it faster. Like that's, I mean, because a lot of people get those, and golf is a sport where accuracy is so important that sometimes, you know, people don't try to, or most of the time, they don't try to swing it as hard as possible. Because, you know, if you do and it goes into somebody's backyard or into the woods or wherever, you know, it's not very good for you. So, but I have seen a lot of people gain speed with the speed sticks as well. So they work. There are things about them that really work, and they can create speed that way too. And so I think, you know, but I've seen it work now with the EXOGEN too. So there's always different ways, and human beings are different and they adapt differently. And so you know, you have to figure out what works best for your particular swing. And I think, you know, this is something that there's just so much more options with, because the speed sticks are the same, right? They're always the same length. I think they have like a ladies length and a men's length, but other than that, there's 3 different weights and they're kind of the same. Whereas this, there's just so many options of where you can put the weight and how you can orient the weight. And there's different things that you can do, which makes it exciting for me, because then we can deal with different humans, right? So humans that don't respond so well to this might respond better to that. And there's so many different ways we could do it.
And that really comes down to knowing how to use the tools in your toolbox and when they're effective and what their limitations are, when they're not.
Right.
JC, just that you did quite a bit of a published review on weighted implements, correct? Which applies across not just golf, baseball, etc.
Yeah. I was just thinking on that last comment. I guess do you see, Scott? I guess with the speed sticks, it's the whole chain, whereas with the wearable resistance, as you say, the permutations are sometimes mind-boggling. And you know, we can have the tool in the toolbox, but we've got to have the diagnostics there to actually be able to say what tool we use. And I guess that's where, you know, we're trying to get in that cluster analysis is that. But I guess one of the advantages with the wearable resistance, do you see it being able to dissociate? You know, we want to work things around the elbow, or we want to work with things around the shoulder, which the speed sticks can't do.
No, for sure. And that's, I mean, Ben Shear, who I think hopefully is still watching, he does a lot of testing in the gym to see where those leaks are coming out of his athletes. So if we put the load here, it's a core leak. If you put the load there, it's a hip leak. Or if you put the load, so that's something we could really get to with this, right? To decide where the loading is optimal, to figure out where that, because you got to get the speed from the ground to the club, and it could be leaking out in multiple different ways or areas. And yeah, so where you put it, I think when we get this stuff into the hands, into the brains of some really smart people like Ben, I think we're going to learn a ton.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that is coming much clearer to me, we've come across another piece of technology called Planteja, which has got, you know, some foot pod technology, which most probably you could be really interested in. Canadian too. You could bloody Canadians.
Everything good comes out of Canada.
yeah, but it's, you know, what we're really excited is about the level of diagnostics that is coming from these foot pods, because we've got the movement solutions based on the diagnostics. It's quite a cool link that I think, you know, going forward is something that it's going to take a bit of work. There's no doubt about it, but it actually is taking a scalpel to what we're doing. That's for sure. You know, like it's
well, yeah. And now this will be the last question, and then we should wrap. We could probably keep talking, but there's a few others. But this is from a good friend of mine in Indonesia. This is Professor Toho. Toho is the head of high performance, and he's the director general for East Java Sports Council. We're over there, and they've got a bunch of kit they've been putting in a cross sport. And he asked a question, which is kind of a controversial one, but it comes back to the one, and it's a perfect one to wrap up on, because it comes back to knowing the tools in the toolbox. Traditional resistance training versus wearable. As LILA is an effective tool to improve speed of the swing of golf, is it through wearable, can wearable resistance fully replace conventional strength training and conditioning for golf, or where does it fit? And again, just a little bit of the comments on that, because people will ask that. And I'll kick it off with a thought. I remember I was training with Athens Olympics again, working with world #1 in badminton, a very highly contested sport at the Olympic level and certainly in Asia, and some of the quickest speeds in the planet, certainly faster than the NBA guys I used to train with. Those guys on badminton are fast. That shuttlecock in doubles badminton is now hitting 500 to 530 kilometers an hour, leaving the racket, making it the fastest implement in sport. And we were doing testing in the gym as a part of a general profile. And I was one of those strength coaches. I was probably teaching power cleans to golfers back in the 80s and 90s. We all were. And that's, but you know, hopefully I'm evolving. And this athlete was world number one. We're in the gym doing bench press testing as a profile for strength. And he looks at me and he goes, "Coach, my racket weighs 80 grams. Why do I have to bench press 80 kilos?" And at the time, that question absolutely stupefied me. And of course, I gave him a BS answer about shoulder strength and all the stuff us gym guys were teaching. But the reality is, he doesn't need bench press for 80 kilos, maybe not even 1 kilo for his sport. So I'll leave the last thought to the two of you on where the tool fits, how people can think about it, and where you see it going in golf and sport.
Yeah, I think this would be a tool that you add on to the traditional strength training methods, because Tiger has taught or has revolutionized the game, right? He was the first one that was in the gym and lifting, and now every guy does it. I don't know one professional golfer that isn't in the gym, you know, working with weights and doing, you know, some kind of strength training. So I don't think you'll ever get rid of that. I mean, even though you can smoke and drink while doing it, it's still a sport. And so we got to be athletic. We got to be athletes. And you know, it can get super technical sometimes, right? People are thinking, I got to get my arm here, I got to get this there. But in the end, you know, if you can just be an athlete and hit the ball, a lot of times that works better. So even the top, you know, golfers get a little too technical sometimes. And I know, you know, I can't think of a top golfer that's not now working in the gym. But I think, you know, adding this could you know, produce a lot different changes as well. Or you could figure out where those leaks are coming out and tailor your training in the gym a lot better once you figure those out with the wearable resistance. Or you can understand where to put it better based on your strengths or weaknesses in the gym. There's such a combination there. I don't think you'll ever get rid of traditional strength training, but adding this could take it to another level for sure.
And like you said, it's individual, right? Some people just need some good basic strength. And not,
yeah.
So, John, your thoughts? We'll leave last comment on for you on that one.
Yeah, again, excuse my ignorance here, guys, but what's the big guy Chambray, or what's his name?
DeChambeau.
DeChambeau. Okay, apparently, what's his history? He was about 12. He's put on about 12, 13 kgs, or he's put on a lot of size recently, hasn't he?
He has, yeah, and he's so he's kind of the one that they're all talking about. They're all chasing now because he's added a ton of distance and speed, and he's still hitting it straight. And so yeah, I mean, I think it's becoming such a speed game, and you know, to control that club, and if you think of the mechanics of that club, when that club at the mass that it is, it's swinging at that speed, there's actually a significant amount of force, centripetal force, you have to hold on to that thing with to make sure it doesn't fly out. So there's it is, you know, the speeds that they're swinging in at, and you know, there's a lot of forces going through that body, and there's a lot of injuries that happen too because of it. So being an athlete and be able to control that mass is important.
Yeah, wearable resistance is never going to be the tool to put on size, okay, for a start. So that's just a given. So again, like you say, that injury resistance to tissues, those high force, high strain rates, perhaps again, the traditional is good. You talked about becoming a better athlete. I've always had this theory, Scott, that becoming a better athlete is really easy, you know, because you get them stronger, you get them fitter or more agile, they become a better athlete. That's what athleticism is. But a lot of the time that is non-specific strength, non-specific change of direction ability, so on and so forth. Becoming a better player is what we're about in a lot of sports. And so that's where the ante gets upped quite a bit. And that's where we need specific strength, specific, you know, metabolic conditioning, specific change of direction ability. So when we're starting to get into that field of fitness training, etc. That's where I think wearable resistance has the advantage, is that, as Joe said earlier on, it's that specific strength of the, and it doesn't mean they have to be dealt with in isolation. We can, you know, we can combination train, we can be in the gym and have the wearable resistance operating at the same time, type of thing. So that would be my thoughts on it.
No, and I like it because I was working with a PGA Tour player recently, and we're trying to get more vertical force in his swing. So like kind of jumping force, because that's what a lot of golfers are using now to speed up the club. And he told me, hey, when I go to the gym, I jump up on these boxes that are super high, and I can do it easily. It's no problem. And I was like, but when he gets in his golf swing, he's so technical. So where does the pressure have to be in my foot? I was like, do you think about where the pressure is in your foot before you jump up on that box in the gym? And he's like, no. I'm like, then just do it. Like, just be an athlete and do it. And I think that's cool. You know, when I put that arm resistance on the person, he got more torque. I mean, I could give him all the technical cues in the world to try to get more torque, but if I can just put arm resistance on him and say swing away, and it happens on its own, that's the best type of coaching in my, because then he can shut his brain off and just let his body go to work.
Well, it's funny because one of the people involved, one of our investors here with LILA, she was asking me the other day, oh, I've got a personal trainer now, and I'm doing these box jumps in the gym. You know, and look, I've been around 35 years in this business, and I've seen the trends come, and the trainers just jump on. First it's strap training, then it's a kettlebell. Now everybody and their dog is doing box jumps because they're all over YouTube and Instagram. You've got 38 mother of 3 doing box jumps, and you've got this golfer doing box jumps. And what I like to do with trainers, say, look, it doesn't mean these things don't have value, but understand what you're getting compared to what you think you're getting. You know, and that's where I think we're continuing to create great tools. I think EXOGEN wearable resistance is one of them. It lends itself to be in the sport, which makes it exciting because you're training your sport. And one thing, you know, people like to play their sport. And so we don't want to disconnect to that. And ultimately, we have to think, is golf, are you becoming fitter or is your game improving? And we're trying to find ways to connect that, right? Fitness is always great. You go to the gym. Yeah, I go to the gym. I love it. Keeps my body strong, makes me feel good about having a bit of muscle mass, but it doesn't always help my boxing. I can tell you that. So I think it's just really, we got to be, and I know because I hear it from my Russian coach every day. After we have a bad session, he looks at me and goes, you did squats yesterday, right? I can see, you know, and so it just reinforces the thinking of what's that tool for. And I think we just have to really help make sure we give good guidance to people on the where and the how. And that's why we're engaged with the two of you, and hopefully people like Ben and Brendan. I just want to do a shout out to Brendan at Be Better Golf, who's having a lot of play too. And we soon to have a much more exciting, I think, some education content and program content coming out with him. And so just on that, I think it's probably time to give it a wrap. I think we've touched on everybody. We just have one thing to announce, you guys. We got the question of the day, goes out to Josh Target. Josh, thank you for your question. You won a new car. No. JC is going to be delivering that to you. Actually, if you want a pair of forearm sleeves, actually the forearm sleeves, our staff will contact you on that. Scott and John, thank you so much for a great presentation.
Thank you. That was fun.
Yeah, and look forward to seeing some really exciting stuff in the research area and golf coming from both of you. And to both of you, be safe. And to all our audience, you know, thanks very much. Staying on with us to the end. And we'll be sharing more content at movementrevolution.com. Chat, yeah, your email. There's email to everybody that'll be putting content out there, because we got a lot of questions on loading and things like that. We're going to send a bunch of that out to the people that were listening involved. Make sure to follow Scott and his research, because you're going to see live research and updates and lots of good information. Like JC said, if you want to learn about golf, that guy up there, wait, that guy, that guy.
The other way, but close enough. Depends how your screens are.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, actually, I would say both those guys. You follow these guys, you're going to learn a lot. Anyways, guys, thanks so much. And we're going to wrap there, and take care and stay safe.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hey, you're there?
Yeah.
That was great.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. That was fun.
Yes, Scott, thanks so much. Is there anything you need from our end right now?
No, I'm going to check in with Brendan. He was the one that was doing the longitudinal study, and I can probably get a few more people to start that. I think that'll be kind of neat to see how it goes over time.
And Ben, AJC, we're going to get a chat. I think we've re-engaged with Ben and maybe talk about him getting some kit too. And
yeah, let's do that, because I think Ben and I had some chats tonight. I think we can do some pretty cool stuff if we both start working on it together, because we both have our swing catalyst plates, so we can both be collecting data on different types of players and start to answer some of those questions. So that'll be really good.
Yeah, just talking to you two guys or just listening, just there seems such a lot to do, just even in an acute sense, isn't there?
Yeah. No, there's a lot to start working your way through, but hey, you start the journey of a million miles with one step.
Your last comment, Scott, remind me of, I thought you were going to bring in Jeremy Shepherd and implicit and explicit learning, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Where the coach says less and the athletes learn more, you know, that type
that
of
is the definite.
Another Canadian was definitely going to get in on the bloody
I know, I tell you, we're everywhere.
you mentioned that, JC. Jeremy and I have just been back online for the last 2 weeks. So he's, yeah. He's in the Yukon. You know, Jeremy's never worked in an office, that guy. He's sitting up there in the Yukon right now with Ken a snowboard, I think. And they switched from skiing to the snowboarding guys, and they're up there, and he wants to get it onto, he's got all kinds of ideas how he wants to get into the aerials, into motions there. So yeah, we've been, although the volleyball study with Trinity is on hold, I think, well, school's on hold everywhere, but they're in training camp, and when he gets back, he wants to talk about getting it in there with the guys for Team Canada.
Joe.
Yeah.
Remember, we're doing bloody use of wearable resistance with Red Bull, with aerial athletes.
Okay.
We
think those guys too. It's let them.
Perfect.
Well, like Jeremy, but the nice thing is Jeremy knows the product, right? So he'll know what. Yeah. But Scott, like I said, it's late there. I don't want to keep you anymore. We can probably talk for another hour about all kind of things. But yeah, thank you both so much. It was awesome. I really appreciate it. It was really fun.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. We'll be in touch.
Take care.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye.
Cheers.